King Solomon is remembered as the wisest man who ever lived. God blessed him with unmatched wisdom, enormous wealth, and great power. But what really happened to this great king? How did a man so highly favored by God end his life in sadness, regret, and spiritual ruin? In this story, we uncover the last days of Solomon, a time filled with reflection on his greatness, his mistakes, and the painful results of turning away from God. We will see how a king who had everything ended up declaring that all is meaningless, and what his story means for us today. What lessons can we take from Solomon's fall? How can we avoid the traps that pulled him away? His story is not only about a king. It is about anyone who has struggled with pride, temptation, and the lure of worldly desires. If this story speaks to you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our updates. Your support helps us continue to bring more powerful Bible stories and life-changing lessons. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. What part of Solomon's journey stood out to you the most? Share in the comments below. And don't forget to pass this story on to your friends and family. These timeless lessons are meant to be shared. Now, let's step into the final chapter of Solomon's life and uncover the truth about his rise, his downfall, and the tragic end of the wisest king of Israel. Don't miss this powerful story. It could completely change how you see your own life. Solomon began his reign with extraordinary promise. He was the son of David and Bathsheba, chosen by God to inherit the throne after David. From the very beginning, his journey was marked by God's guidance and blessing. In 1 Kings 3 verse 5, we read that the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at Gibeon and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Solomon's request would shape his legacy. He didn't ask for riches, long life, or victory over his enemies. Instead, in 1 Kings 3 verse 9, he humbly asked, "Give your servant an understanding heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to rule this great nation of yours?" God was pleased with Solomon's prayer. In 1 Kings 3 verses 10 to 14, God gave him wisdom beyond measure and also promised him wealth, honor, and long life, if he would remain faithful to his commands. Solomon's wisdom was quickly tested when two women came before him, each claiming to be the mother of the same child. As told in 1 Kings 3 verses 16 to 28, Solomon suggested dividing the baby in two, knowing the real mother would give up her claim rather than see her child killed. The people of Israel were amazed at his wisdom, seeing that God's wisdom was truly in him. From that moment, Solomon's fame spread across nations. In 1 Kings 4 verses 29 to 30, the Bible says, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as endless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He wrote 3,000 proverbs and more than 1,000 songs. 1 Kings 4 verse 32, covering themes of life, leadership, nature, and faith. His wisdom attracted even the Queen of Sheba, a powerful ruler who traveled far to test him with hard questions. In 1 Kings 10 verses 6 to 7, she said, "The report I heard in my own country about your wisdom and wealth is true, but I did not believe until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told to me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard." This encounter showed how God's blessing on Solomon was not only for him, but a testimony to the whole world of God's favor on Israel. Solomon's greatest achievement was building the temple in Jerusalem, something his father David had longed to do. In 1 Kings 6, we read how the temple was built with the best materials, cedar from Lebanon, gold, silver, and bronze. It took 7 years to complete and became the spiritual center of Israel, the place where God's presence would dwell. In 1 Kings 8 verses 10 to 11, when the temple was finished, the glory of the Lord filled it. Solomon then led Israel in a prayer of dedication, recorded in 1 Kings 8 verses 22 to 53. He acknowledged God's greatness and asked him to hear the prayers of his people. His prayer is summed up in 1 Kings 8 verse 23. "Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You keep your covenant of love with your servants who continue to walk faithfully in your ways." Under Solomon's rule, Israel reached a level of wealth, influence, and strength never seen before. His kingdom became a shining example of prosperity, drawing traders, scholars, and rulers from every part of the known world. In 1 Kings 10 verses 23 to 24, it says, King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. King Solomon was richer and wiser than all the kings of the earth. People from every nation came to hear the wisdom that God had placed in his heart. His wealth was beyond measure. He controlled key trade routes that linked Egypt to Mesopotamia, bringing treasures like gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks from faraway lands. 1 Kings 10 verse 22. His fleet of ships returned every 3 years loaded with riches, showing how wide his influence reached. In 1 Kings 10 verse 14, we learn that Solomon's yearly income in gold alone was 666 talents, over 25 tons of gold every year. His throne was unlike any other. As described in 1 Kings 10 verses 18 to 20, it was made of ivory and covered in pure gold. It had 6 steps, each side guarded by 12 lions, one on each step. It was a clear symbol of his unmatched power, and no kingdom had anything like it. His wealth even showed in the details of daily life. In 1 Kings 10 verse 21, it is recorded that all of Solomon's drinking cups were made of gold, and every item in the palace of the forest of Lebanon was also gold. Silver was not used at all, because in Solomon's day silver was considered too common to have value. This shows the incredible abundance and luxury of his reign, where even silver was thought unworthy. But with such great wealth also came temptation. Solomon's power and influence led him to form political ties with surrounding nations, and these were often sealed by marriage. The Bible says in 1 Kings 11 verses 1 to 2 that Solomon loved many foreign women, Moabites, Ammonites, Sidonians, and Hittites, nations that God had warned Israel not to marry. The Lord had said that such marriages would surely lead hearts away to other gods. Solomon ignored these warnings. He had 700 wives, who were princesses, and 300 concubines. 1 Kings 11 verse 3. These marriages were not just political. They directly disobeyed God's command in Deuteronomy 17 verse 17, which warned that kings must not take many wives, or their hearts would be led astray. As Solomon grew older, the influence of his wives became heavier and began to turn his heart away from God. In 1 Kings 11 verse 4 it says, As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Even though God had given him more wisdom than any man, Solomon allowed his love for women to weaken his devotion to the God of Israel. This disobedience became clear in his actions. He built high places, altars on hilltops where people worshipped other gods. For example, in 1 Kings 11 verse 5, Solomon built an altar for Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, a fertility goddess tied to immorality and false worship. He also built high places for Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, whose worship included child sacrifice, something the Lord completely hated. 1 Kings 11 verses 7 to 8. These were not harmless cultural practices. They were direct acts of disobedience against God's commands. In Deuteronomy 12 verses 2 to 3, God had told Israel to destroy all such high places, not to build new ones. Solomon's actions were a bold rejection of God's law. The sad irony of Solomon's story is that the very wisdom he had asked God for, the wisdom to tell right from wrong, was now clouded by compromise and idolatry. He became trapped in the very sins God had warned his people against. In Deuteronomy 7 verses 3 to 4, God commanded Israel not to marry foreign women because they would turn their children away from following him to serve other gods. Yet Solomon ignored this and gave his heart to idols. His divided loyalty stood in stark contrast to his father David, who, even with his sins, remained fully devoted to the Lord. Because of this, God's anger burned against Solomon. The Lord had appeared to him twice, first at Gibeon and later in Jerusalem, each time reminding him of his covenant and warning him to remain faithful. In 1 Kings 9 verses 6 to 7, God said, "But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not keep the commands and decrees I have given you, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land." Even after all the warnings, Solomon's heart became stubborn. He kept building shrines and taking part in idol worship. In 1 Kings 11 verses 9 to 10, we read God's response. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had commanded Solomon not to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. Solomon's fall is a warning for all generations. A man who had everything, wisdom, wealth, and God's favor, allowed his heart to be drawn away by foreign gods and by the influence of those around him. He chose the approval of his wives and their idols over his devotion to the God who had blessed him so greatly. Because of this, the Lord declared judgment. In 1 Kings 11 verse 11, God said, "Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, I will certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." This marked the beginning of the end for the United Kingdom of Israel. The glorious realm Solomon had built with God's blessing was now headed toward division, conflict, and downfall. Yet God's judgment was also mixed with mercy. For the sake of David, Solomon's father, the kingdom would not be taken away during Solomon's lifetime. Instead, the punishment would fall on his son Rehoboam. 1 Kings 11 verses 12 to 13. Still, the warning was clear. Solomon's unfaithfulness had brought this upon himself. In 1 Kings 11 verses 29 to 31, we see this judgment acted out. The prophet Ahijah met Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, outside Jerusalem. Ahijah took a new cloak, tore it into 12 pieces, and said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." This powerful image showed that Israel would be divided because of Solomon's sins. On the final day of his life, Solomon, the wisest and wealthiest man on earth, sat in his palace looking back at the glory of his reign. He remembered the wisdom that amazed nations, the riches beyond measure, and a kingdom that reached the height of its power. But instead of joy, his last thoughts were heavy with sadness, disobedience, and regret. The book of Ecclesiastes, often linked to his later years, captures his reflections. In Ecclesiastes 1 verse 2, Solomon writes, "Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless." These words reveal the emptiness he felt as he looked back on a life that had drifted far from God. Despite all his wisdom, he had forgotten the one who gave him everything. He remembered the day he dedicated the temple, that sacred building he had built for the Lord, 1 Kings 8. He recalled praying with all his heart for God's presence to dwell there, and how the glory of the Lord had filled the temple like a cloud. But now, in his later years, his heart was far from those early days of devotion. In Ecclesiastes 2 verses 10 to 11, Solomon admitted the futility of his pursuits. "I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun." His riches had allowed him to enjoy every kind of pleasure: grand palaces, vineyards, treasures, exotic animals, countless servants, and music to fill his courts. Yet in old age, it all seemed empty. He had gained the whole world but lost his way with God. In Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10, Solomon wrote, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless." He realized too late that the endless desire for wealth and pleasure had pulled him away from the true purpose of life. In his younger days, Solomon had walked closely with God. He built the temple as a symbol of God's presence with his people. But over time, his many foreign wives, political deals, and compromises with idolatry weakened that relationship. He abandoned his first love, the God who had appeared to him in dreams and blessed him with wisdom. His writings reflect a man who had tasted both the heights of greatness and the depths of failure. In Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6, Solomon once advised, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Yet Solomon himself had failed to follow this very wisdom. By chasing earthly pleasures, he leaned on his own understanding and drifted from the straight path God had laid before him. Near the end of Ecclesiastes, Solomon offered his final conclusion. In Ecclesiastes 12 verse 13 he wrote, "Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." These words show what he finally came to understand, that true fulfillment is only found in obeying God. Solomon's last day was a solemn reminder of how short-lived earthly pursuits really are. He had been given wisdom, riches, and power beyond measure, yet wasted them by turning from God. As he faced his final moments, he knew that without devotion to the Lord, everything else was worthless. In Ecclesiastes 7 verse 29, he summed up what he had learned through pain and failure. "This only have I found. God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes." Solomon spoke a deep truth when he said, "This is what I have discovered. God made people upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes." The man who was once the wisest of his time had himself been trapped by the schemes he created. His final reflections became a warning for all people who chase after fulfillment in worldly things instead of seeking it in God. The story of Solomon is a serious reminder about the importance of staying faithful to God. His last days were not filled with joy or triumph, but with deep thought and sadness over what he had lost. He began his life and reign with great promise, yet his later years were clouded by regret. The king, known for unmatched wisdom, learned in the end that no amount of riches, intelligence, or pleasure could ever replace a heart fully given to God. We should take his final words seriously and remember that our true purpose is not found in chasing after wealth or earthly success, but in fearing God and keeping his commands. The legacy of Solomon reminds us that the greatest treasures in life are not what we build with our own hands, but the lasting relationship we hold with our Creator. The final day of King Solomon's life was not remembered with victory and celebration, but with the sorrow of a man who had drifted away from God. Let us learn from his mistakes. What matters most is not how we begin, but how we finish. May we all hold firmly to our faith in God until the very end. Thank you for watching, and if you found this message meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share. Always remember that true wisdom comes from following God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul.